Hey guys, welcome to Give Your Grades a Glow Up. Today we're going to be looking at a poem from the Power and Conflict cluster. The poem I want to look at is Ozymandias by Percy Shelley. Ozymandias is a poem about a traveller who tells a really interesting story. Basically, he was in the desert and he saw a broken statue, a random pair of legs, and it's got no head, no body. Nearby in the sand, there's like a broken face, which is like half sunk. He discovers that that statue actually belongs to King Ozymandias, who was a really arrogant and cruel dictator who wanted to show off his great empire. But, plot twist, the empire hadn't lasted, nor has he. All there is now is a barren, empty desert and his broken statue that no one ever looked after or visited. Let's read the poem. I met a traveller from an antique land who said, "Two vast and trunkless legs of stone stand in the desert. Near them, on the sand, half sunk, a shattered visage lies, whose frown and wrinkled lip and sneer of cold command tell that its sculptor well those passions read which yet survive. Stamped on these lifeless things the hand that mocked them and the heart that fed. And on the pedestal, these words appear. My name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair." Nothing beside remains. Round the decay of that colossal wreck, boundless and bare, the lone and level sands stretch far away. Okay, now in our unseen poetry lesson, we learned how to select 3 juicy quotations. That means quotations that have an interesting language device, interesting words in there, and then mind map them to say as many interesting things as possible. That's essentially what we're going to do with all of our anthology poems. If you create 3 mind maps for each of your 15 anthology poems, you'll be ready for whatever poem comes up in your exams. So, let's have a look and try and do that with Ozymandias. Two vast and trunkless legs of stone stand in the desert. Vast means big, trunkless means it's only the legs, there's no body. Near them on the sand, half sunk, a shattered visage, that's the broken face bit of the statue, frown and wrinkled lip, and sneer of cold command. I think this actually could potentially be one of my key quotes, so let's mind map it. Was he a nice person from that quotation? No, he's frowning. So clearly he's not very pleasant. The pejoratives, which means negative words, frown, wrinkle, sneer, cold, make him seem really hostile. His expression seems really unfriendly. Sneer also shows he enjoys mocking people. Cold makes him seem really callous. He lacks empathy. He has no warmth. Command connotes a sense of authority. He's like a dictator. He believes everyone should follow his instructions and he's obsessed with his power. A megalomaniac, someone who loves power. There's actually guttural alliteration in cold command, which sounds like choking, back of the throat. It shows perhaps how he suffocated people under his reign and abused those he had control over. Now, for those of you who are aiming for a grade 9, there's also repetition of the word "and" in this quotation. Do you remember what the funky word for that is? Polysyndeton. Shelley's use of polysyndeton here could perhaps convey the ongoing nature of Ozymandias' abuse and the prolonged negative effect he had on his people. Let's talk about structure, because I think we can even bring in structure into this quotation. If you missed the questions you should ask yourself about structure in poetry, you can go back to the unseen poetry lesson and have a look at that. So in this quotation, there is actually caesura, there's punctuation in the line, and there's enjambment. The line runs onto like the sentence runs on to the next line. So I need to decide which one I'm going to talk about. And in this case, I'm going to pick the caesura. And I'm going to say the caesura slows down the pace of the line, which represents how long people had to endure suffering. So I'm linking my structural analysis to the meaning of the poem, not just saying this makes the reader want to read on, or this creates tension, this has an effect. I'm not being vague, I'm being specific. Okay, moving on. Tell that its sculptor well those passions read which yet survive. That line basically just means the person, the sculptor who made this statue, made it seem so realistic. It's almost like you can still feel those negative emotions when you look at the statue that you would have got from him in real life. So this bit is super interesting. It says, on the pedestal, these words appear. A pedestal is like the blocky bit at the bottom of the statue that it's standing on. Ozymandias could have written any words on this pedestal. So people for years would remember who he was and what he stood for. If I had a statue, let's think about this. What would I want my pedestal to say? Thank you to my eyebrow lady. I'm not funny, that's the problem.
Hello, everybody.
Darling, you're on loudspeaker.
Hello, everybody.
If I had a pedestal, what would I write on it?
Something from Legally Blonde.
This is what people are going to remember you for generations to come. But he chooses to say this. My name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair. There's lots to unpick there. So let's go with the possessive pronoun my. My makes him seem selfish and greedy. Then he actually refers to himself in third person. He says, Ozymandias. He declares his name, which makes him seem really narcissistic, like he loves himself and really arrogant. He believes his name holds such great power and value. Then there's repetition where it says King of Kings. He ain't just the king. He's a king of kings. He wants everyone to be aware of his superiority. He gives himself this elevated status. This reference of King of Kings also alludes to the Bible because Jesus was referred to as King of Kings. So Ozymandias is giving himself like a godlike status. Where he goes on to say, look on my works, we can do a bit of analysis there and say it's an imperative, command, look on my works. He wants people to see the empire that he has built and feel inferior as a result. He's basically saying like, look at what I've done and look, I'm better than you, is what he's trying to say. And then there's an exclamation mark. If there's a punctuation mark, I'm going to talk about it. So that exclamation mark kind of emphasizes this image of aggression, as if he was really frightening. Do you know what's really interesting? Now that I'm thinking about it, it's really interesting that he speaks in present tense. He says, my name is. It's like he believes his power is going to last forever. He will last forever. But will he? The next line says, nothing beside remains. There's a sudden change in tone. It's like, my name is Ozzy. Nothing beside remains. That sudden change of tone is called bathos. And Shelley intentionally employs bathos to show how futile, pointless the words on the pedestal are. He is now nothing but a colossal wreck, the lone and level sand stretch far away. Let's mind map. Colossal wreck, do you remember what that's called when there's two opposite words next to each other? It's an oxymoron. Colossal connotes something that is huge and wreck something that is destroyed. And having those two words right next to each other emphasizes how powerful he was, yet how quickly he lost that power and was destroyed. He and his empire are nothing more than a broken statue on a barren desert. And right now it's half sung, but soon it will completely disappear. I can probably reinforce that structurally, because we like to reinforce structurally, by saying the poem is written as one short stanza, cementing how short-lived and brief his power was. Lone and level is alliteration, lone and level, and that creates an echo effect, like la la, la la. You know, that kind of like echoing sound, which shows how the desert is empty. No one came to look after his statue. No one cared because he abused his power. Sans stretch, the sibilance creates this really peaceful tone to show how peaceful it's been since he's died. So there's a juxtaposition between the arrogance of Ozymandias and the loss, the demise, the death of his empire. Is that 3 mind maps? I think that's 3 mind maps. There you have it. We have 3 mind maps with 3 juicy quotations with loads of interesting things to say about Ozymandias. However, it's not over yet. At the end of the paragraph, or wherever in the paragraph you feel like it's relevant, we also need to introduce context and poet's message. It's really important you don't put context as like a separate paragraph by itself. You've got to naturally embed it where it's relevant to what you're saying in your analysis, or at the end of your paragraph if it's relevant. And context basically means explain what was going on during the time the poem was written, and therefore what message was the poet trying to give the reader. So all of these poems, something interesting was happening in society at the time that the poets felt really strongly about, and so they were trying to give some messages to the reader. So interesting context for Ozymandias is Shelley, the poet. We refer to them by their surname because they're not our mate. Shelley was a romantic poet with a capital R. Romantic does not mean he was a lover. It means he was part of the Romantic movement, which was a response to the Industrial Revolution. And that's when there were all these factories being built everywhere. They were breaking down all of nature, breaking down all of like the beauty of London to build factories and make more money. And there was suddenly loads of pollution, and some poets like Shelley, they were mourning the loss of spirituality and religion and nature and emotions at a time where money seemed to be taking over everything. So because Shelley was a romantic poet, his message through this poem was that human power is temporary, it's transient, it's ephemeral. Ephemeral. Really like that word. It's not going to last, basically. It's futile, it's pointless. Nature will outlive human beings and is more powerful than them. The poem is based on a real Egyptian pharaoh, Ramses II, who left a statue with an arrogant inscription behind. He wanted to build memorials for himself, which he imagined would last forever. However, he used slave labor to build them, and the slaves suffered hardship under his control. So Shelley was conveying an allegorical message in this poem to political leaders who abused their power. This idea is actually further reinforced by the form of the poem. This poem is written in the form of a sonnet. It's 14 lines long, and sonnets are traditionally about love or death. So in this sense, the poem could be seen to be about Ozymandias' love for himself and love for his power, and also the death of his power. The poem also uses something called iambic pentameter, which means the lines in the poem are 10 syllables long. I met a traveller from an antique land. Do you see? 10. And it's meant to be read in like this rhythm that sounds like a heartbeat or a ticking of a clock. So in this case, perhaps the use of iambic pentameter is emblematic of the insignificance of human power compared to the inevitable passing of time. Yes. And there you have it, a full analysis of an anthology poem, Ozymandias. I hope you found it helpful. I hope you learned something new. If you found this video useful, give me a like, and don't forget to watch the rest of the videos in this series. ephemeral. Is that how you pronounce it? Ephemeral.